Do you think that immigration represents a major threat to Britain from a demographic perspective? So in the last 20 years, the white British population has declined from 87% to 74%. Is that a concern of yours?
No, that's
Why?
not a concern of mine.
You say you're not concerned about demographic changes in Britain, but we have seen the fastest and most rapid decline of the white British population ever experienced in British history. This has happened in such a tiny, short period of time. And I think some people, many people in Britain are concerned about that. Majority cities that were once, 90% white British are now majority ethnic minority. Look at London, Leicester, Birmingham. So why isn't that a concern of yours?
Look, I'm very concerned that we have whole areas of our towns and cities that are unrecognisable as being English. But they're not unrecognisable as being English because of skin colour. They're unrecognisable because of culture.
If Britain is made up of a majority of immigrants and their descendants, is it the same country?
Well, it's not the same country because you don't actually have anything in common. And if you finish up with large numbers of people with whom you have nothing in common, well, clearly it's going to be a very different place. And one that's going to struggle.
In Birmingham recently, we saw anti-white graffiti painted on a school. This was in an area which was more than 90% non-white British, ethnically diverse, mostly kind of Asian population. We've also seen examples of anti-white discrimination in the RAF and more recently in the police. These were court cases, found that these people were discriminated against because of the colour of their skin. Is Britain becoming systemically racist against white people?
I think some of the institutions are, and the Royal Air Force perhaps is the best example of the lot. Problem is we're living in a two-tier country. Two-tier attitudes towards employment, two-tier attitudes towards policing. I mean, Black Lives Matter, police officers taking the knee, dancing in the streets virtually. You get a rough crowd at a football game and the policing's very, very different. Two-tier justice. Where people who say beastly things on Facebook might get 2 or 3 years in prison, but others who commit really very serious offences get non-custodial sentences, like the guy that threw cement at me.
In terms of the atmosphere in Britain, are you concerned that there is a rising level of anti-white hatred?
I'm just concerned about a deeply divided society.
Do you support mass deportations?
Well, if people come illegally, they should not be allowed to stay. Simple as. Simple as.
But just back to the issue of deportations specifically, do you support that mass deportations? Trump says in America that he wants mass deportations. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants are in Britain at the moment. Some estimates say the number could even be in, 1 million plus. So do you support deporting all of those people?
It's impossible to do. Literally impossible to do.
But if the Americans can do it, for example, in America, they are able to deport a lot of people. I know they haven't under this administration, but Trump was able to. It's not totally impossible, is it? I mean, it should be an ambition at least. Is it your ambition?
The mass deportations in America really happened under Eisenhower, where back in the 50s, he deported over 1 million people who'd come to America illegally. For us, at the moment, it's a political impossibility.
But is it your ambition?
No. I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that.
But these people who have come here, some of whom we don't know anything about, one case, terrible case recently, we saw Thomas Roberts, a 21-year-old, young British chap, being stabbed to death by someone who smuggled himself into the country in 2018. These people need to go, don't they? And by saying that you don't support, mass deportations...
If I say I support mass deportations, that's all anybody will talk about for the next 20 years. So it's pointless even going there.
So it's a rhetorical problem.
It's a political impossibility to deport hundreds of thousands of people. We simply can't do it.
I want to talk about Islam and Winston Churchill to end the interview. So we'll bring the two things together to begin with. A quote from Churchill: "Individual Muslims may show splendid qualities. Thousands become the brave and loyal soldiers of the Queen. All know how to die, but the influence of the religion paralyzes the social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world. Far from being moribund, Mohammedanism is a militant and proselytizing faith." Do you agree with Mr. Churchill?
Well, Churchill fought against Mohammedanism. I mean, he charged with a lance at the Battle of Omdurman. He could have died. I am convinced that the vast majority of British Muslims are worried about the growth of radical Islam. It's not an argument you hear very often, but I believe it absolutely to be true. I'm very worried about the number of 18 to 24-year-old young men who think jihad's acceptable, and I did talk about this over the course of the last few months. I'm deeply worried about that. But I know that the people that are really worried about that are the moderate, law-abiding, tax-paying, peace-abiding Muslim majority that live in our country. My party chairman, Zia Yusuf, he is quite prepared to stand up and call this out. So, yes, extremist Islam is a very, very dangerous, very retrograde force. And look what it's done, since Kabul fell. Look at the way women are having to live in Iran. So these answers are all too obvious. Churchill was right about that. But I think if we sort of try and condemn the religion in its entirety, we're possibly building up enemies that we don't need to.